I had rented an Airbnb to stay at for several weeks. While I was in between apartments, I had just moved out of my apartment and hadn't yet found another place to move to. So I had all of my stuff in a storage unit. For the time being, this Airbnb was in a small neighborhood, about 30 minutes from where I lived before. It seemed like a quiet town with not much going on. Not the cleanest or nicest place, but not the worst either. On one of my first few nights staying there, I happened to glance out the front window and saw a couple of guys standing outside of the house. They were on the sidewalk, but pretty clearly looking up at the house I was in. As soon as they saw me, they looked away and left the area, which just made it a little more odd than it should have been. But I didn't think it was anything worth looking into. I just closed the blinds and continued on with my night. Nothing worth mentioning happened for the rest of the night or in the morning. Though on that following day in the afternoon, I headed out to my car real quick to grab a few loose things that I'd forgotten, and noticed a guy down the road. He was standing by the curb just one house over. And when we made eye contact, he had this weird stare like he knew me or something. Sort of gave me the creeps, so I just looked away and walked back inside. I thought if it could have been one of the men that I saw outside the house last night, but I really had no way to know. When I saw those guys, it was too dark to get any good look at them, and I'm not sure why that would warrant such a weird stare from this guy anyway. So again, I brushed it off as nothing and didn't worry about it. I had to get some work done that day, so I was on my laptop in the bedroom working for several hours, then spent another few hours looking through the apartment websites for anything good. I got up around 8, heading back downstairs to the kitchen to make something quick for dinner, and at 9, just before bed, I tied up the trash bag and took it out to the bins on the side of the house. While I was out there, I noticed a small stone path leading to the backyard. Honestly, I'd been so caught up in other things the few days that I'd been there, I'd never even checked out the backyard at all. The path just reminded me, and so I followed it through the fence gate. The backyard was fenced in by this very old, weathered wooden fence, and from the inside of the house, it looked small and like there was nothing much, aside from a fire pit in the grass, but off to the side there was actually a shed. A fairly big one too, made out of the same weathered wood as the fence. And peeking through the gaps in the wood, there was lights. Of course, confused, I walked up to it. I listened for a moment, somewhat concerned someone might be in there, but I didn't hear anything, so I opened it up. No one was there, but the small overhead light bulb was on. Before clicking it off, I looked around a little bit, because this shed was not what I expected. I assumed there'd be old, rusty tools all over and maybe just a bunch of junk, but it was not at all like that. The shed had an old couch, a couple of desks and dressers, but otherwise was empty. I clicked off the lights and closed the doors. I had that little voice in the back of my head saying, that was really concerning, that it looked like someone might have been in there, and the light being on was really suspicious. But surely that wasn't it? The light must have been left on for days, well before I got there, and I never noticed it, because I wasn't in the backyard at all. I headed in and sat on the couch, deciding to watch some TV before bed, to keep my head clear. I didn't even make it to bed though. The couch was one of those pull-out recliner ones, so I was basically lying down while watching TV. And after just 30 minutes, I was out cold. Hours later, I woke up to a thump. My eyes opened quickly and I heard it again. Someone was walking inside the house. Their footsteps slowly moved down the staircase and into the front hallway, then toward one of the rooms in the back of the house. I almost didn't believe myself. Like this was a dream or something. I got up from the couch and walked quietly to the corner of the room, then looked around the wall. A figure was standing in the dark, facing away from me, and looking like he was peering around the room. He wasn't like he was looking for something or someone. I moved back out of sight. After a moment, his footsteps moved through the hallway, and approaching the living room, I immediately moved to the other side, and just before I had time to go anywhere else, I froze in the corner. As the man walked into the opening of the room, he stood there facing me, darkness covering every detail of him. His head moved looking at the couch, and then he mumbled something under his breath. With a hella short, frustrated whisper to himself. He couldn't see me. I was in the darkest corner of the room, nearly pitch black, but I knew if he walked any further in and got closer, he'd surely notice. But he didn't. He just peered in and looked at the couch, then walked away. His footsteps went to the back door and he left. I grabbed my phone and keys and booked it out to my car. I called 911 and the Airbnb host, who did not respond. Police arrived, and even though the host didn't respond to my call, he showed up just minutes after the police did. The whole thing was over within an hour, though with basically nothing happening. They looked around with flashlights and took my report, then I got a refund for my stay and left. That was it. Obviously, I'm extremely convinced that man inside the house was the owner. But even more disturbing is that he was looking for me. When I woke up, I heard his footsteps coming down the staircase. So he had entered the home and walked directly upstairs to the bedroom, and only then did he come back down to search the other rooms. Luckily, he checked the living room last, and I'd already woken up by then. So, when he whispered "where the hell" under his breath, it was probably because he couldn't find me, despite knowing I had to be inside somewhere. Had I not fallen asleep on the couch and been in one of the bedrooms when the guy entered the home, I don't know if I would have woken up, or what would have happened next. Generally speaking though, I probably would have gone missing and not been seen again after that night. I had booked an Airbnb for 3 days. It was a small place in the woods, but not really secluded. It was in a neighborhood, just with lots of forest and land in between the houses. This was my first time ever using Airbnb though, and I didn't know too much about the process, or what to expect. When I pulled up to the address around 5 p.m., I definitely wasn't expecting the place to be right next to another house, like literally about 10 feet apart. It was clear the rental was some sort of secondary home, on the same driveway as the main house. I definitely was hoping for something a little bit more private, but I was sure it would probably not be as bad as I was thinking. I parked close to the Airbnb and got in. Then started to move my things from my car into the house. As I did, an older man came out of the main house and walked right up to my car. He introduced himself as Evan, the host of the rental. This guy was in his 50s, and the best way to describe him was just as a large man, tall and big with a thick gray beard. He gave me a strange feeling from the start though. Just that something wasn't quite right about this guy. He didn't say anything concerning, but he kept calling me buddy, which was a little weird. But after a couple minutes, he left me to enjoy the Airbnb, and so I hoped that would be my one and only interaction with him during my stay. And overall, I thought he was weird but harmless. I got everything in and relaxed on the couch for a while, then made a very late dinner. I think I started cooking around 8:30. On my way to the Airbnb, I had picked up a ribeye steak from the store, thinking it'd be cool to cook on my first night there, not realizing how exhausted I'd actually be. I was starving though, so I fried it up quickly in a pan and ate it without any sides. After that, I took an early shower and went to bed, passing out within a couple of minutes. I didn't have anything planned for the day, aside from going back into town to get some groceries. After making coffee and waking up a little, I figured I might as well get that over with early so I could relax the rest of the day. I headed out and picked up some drinks and food for the next couple of days, and got back to the rental about an hour later. Right when I pulled up, Evan came walking out of his house. He waved at me and I thought that was it. But when I looked up again, he was approaching my car. I got out and started grabbing the groceries, hoping he was just heading down to the mailbox or something, but when I turned around, he was standing right over me. "How was your first night? Did everything go well?" I said yeah, everything was great. He smiled and nodded. "How'd the steak turn out last night?" "Hopefully my kitchen had everything you needed." I was taken aback for a moment. How the hell did he know what I made for dinner last night? I think my face showed my shock, and I stuttered a couple times. When the man spoke again. "The steak. You told me yesterday you picked one up for dinner." "Oh yeah. Yeah, it was good, thanks." He smiled again and nodded, then started to walk back to his house. I then hurried and went back inside. Did I really tell him that I brought a steak yesterday? I hardly remembered our short conversation, as I was more focused on the weird feeling I had about him, but it seemed really unlikely that I just randomly brought up what I was going to make for dinner. And seeing as he went right back to his house afterward, it was also strange. He came out just to talk to me again, and for no other reason. The uneasy feelings about him only got worse. But I convinced myself that I had to have mentioned the steak thing, and just didn't remember, and that maybe Airbnb hosts talk to their customers a lot. I had no way of knowing because this was my first time. Over the next few hours I checked out the windows, just to make sure that Evan guy wasn't being that weird. I never saw him, which I guess gave me a little bit of relief. I went on with the rest of my day, and it turned out to be relaxing, with nothing else happening. I made dinner, watched TV, and went to bed. However, in the night, I woke up. I didn't remember hearing anything, or having any reason for waking up, but I didn't feel good. I felt uncomfortable. I sat up, and after a minute, I felt off enough to get up and walk around the house. I slowly went through checking the rooms, and eventually got to the front door. It was unlocked. I opened it and looked outside. It was quiet and no one was out there, but I could see across the yard that Evan's house had a light on, though the rest of the house was dark. I closed and locked it. Honestly, I don't really know how. In the moment, I didn't think about why the door was unlocked. Maybe I was too tired, or I just assumed I'd forgotten to lock it. But at the time, it wasn't a significant thing to me. I just checked the house to make sure I was alone and nothing else was off, and then I got back in bed and slept until 5 in the morning. The sun hadn't come up yet, but I was wide awake as it wasn't until I had woken up that I really thought about everything. That feeling of being watched was looming over me, and every strange thing that had happened since getting to that rental was adding up in my head. Was I being watched? I got dressed and started walking through the house again, but more intently than I had in the middle of the night. I was looking for anything off, and after just a couple minutes of looking, I found something in the kitchen. One of the outlets had a black charging brick plugged into it. Now, initially, when I saw it the day I arrived, I didn't even think anything of it. It even had a charging cable coming out of it, so I thought it was just a complimentary charger. But when I looked closer, there was a small dot on the front. I couldn't tell for sure, but it looked like a lens to a mini hidden camera. I felt my face get pale as I quickly unplugged it. I then ran around the house, seeing nearly every room had one of these plugged into an outlet, even the bedroom. And then I was interrupted. "Hello, hey. You mind opening the door for a minute? Just need to check a couple things, hello." "Yeah, I know you're in there. Can you open the door?" Evan was calling out from the front door coincidentally, just a few minutes after I'd found the cameras. His knocks were quick and heavy, like he was panicking. I immediately started packing up everything in my room. I needed to leave right now. As I was packing, he continued calling out and hitting the door, until it suddenly got very quiet. Enough for me to feel something off. I stopped moving and listened. He very quietly unlocked and opened the front door. I slammed the bedroom door shut, grabbed my suitcase, and left out the window. I heard the bedroom door open as I hit the ground, and I made a dead sprint for my car. I got in and fled the house. I spent the day at a hotel an hour away from the Airbnb. I called friends and family, telling them what had happened, and after consulting with them, I decided to call the cops. It did not go how I expected, though. They went to his house to question him, and he let them look around, but all the charging bricks I'd mentioned were gone, and Evan answered none of their questions with honesty, saying everything I said had not happened, and ultimately, it was my word against his and nothing came of it. I imagine after he saw me notice the cameras, Evan likely came over to the rental, with horrible intentions, to prevent me from telling anyone. Disturbingly, that pretty much proves that he was actively monitoring and watching me through the cameras. I still feel incredibly uneasy, thinking about being in that house, and what could have happened. I noticed not long after, though, he removed his rental from Airbnb, and as of today, years later, I still don't see it on there. A couple years ago, I drove up to northern Minnesota to stay at a cabin rental. It wasn't a fancy one like Airbnb or whatever. It was a privately owned spot with a somewhat sketchy website, but most personally owned and hosted. Remote. Cabin rental sites were very outdated and poorly made, so this really wasn't that unusual. I'd done this a lot before at different cabins. For this trip I chose this one because it was cheap, and the pictures looked nice of the surrounding woods, and it looked like a good place to lay low and relax, for a few days away from the city, at somewhere I hadn't been to before. Although pretty much the moment I got to the cabin, I felt off. It was extremely remote. More so than I'd ever been, and my gut just had this strange feeling about the woods. Looking out into the trees did not feel calm. It felt creepy, like something was out there. But I just couldn't see it. I tried not to think too hard about it. I only had a few hours left on that first day, so I stayed in and enjoyed the fireplace until I was sleepy, then went to bed in the middle of the night. I'd guess 1 or 2 a.m. I woke up to a soft sound outside the cabin. It sounded like something moving around on the wooden porch right outside the front door, but by the time I'd fully woken up, the sound was already moving away. I quickly got up and checked out the door, but no one was out there, no animals or anything either. The woods were dark, and that eerie feeling fell over me again. I closed it. I didn't know exactly what I'd heard, but I was sure that I did hear it. Something was outside the front door. I stayed up for a while, but everything seemed to stay quiet, and I eventually fell asleep again. The first several hours in the morning were calm. I ate and made coffee, and nothing really happened. Around noon, I really wanted to go for a walk, and although I was hesitant, because of the gut feeling I've had about the woods, I convinced myself it was nothing, and that a walk would be good for me. I headed out. There weren't any real trails, at least not leading away from the cabin, so I just started walking in a straight line behind the cabin. I only walked maybe 5 minutes when I stumbled on a path. It looked like a footpath, faintly winding between the trees. Without thinking too much about it, I started to follow it. I really wasn't sure if this was even from people, or someone walking through the woods, or if it was just from the wildlife. I got my answer not too far down it, though. At the end, there was a large tent set up. One of those big semi-permanent ones. Around the campsite was a ton of old gear and junk, making it look like someone actually lived there. The tent flap was open and no one was inside of it, but it looked like someone had definitely been there recently, like it for sure was not abandoned. It gave me a really disturbing feeling, knowing how close it was to the cabin I was staying in. I only stayed for a minute before hurrying back to the cabin. Once I was back, I got on the phone to try and contact the host, hoping to get some answers. But that was when I found out that I didn't even have their number, or really any way to contact the owner, except through the email on their website, and my phone only had 1 bar of service, making it difficult to do anything. The tent or someone else being out there in such a remote area was already just a little much, but finding all of that after having a lingering, eerie gut feeling is what had me on edge. Like my body knew something I didn't. But the woods stayed empty and quiet for the rest of the day. As the sun was setting, I thought maybe having a beer or two would help me relax. I sat on the chair in the living room and drank for a bit. But 20 minutes after the sun went down, I heard something at the front door. I stood up and looked at the door, hearing this loud scratching sound in the wood. It repeated over and over as I slowly approached. No idea what it was I was hearing. When I got right up to the other side of the door, behind the scratches I could hear heavy breathing. "Hello, who's out there? What the hell are you doing?" I yelled. Instantly the scratching stopped, and footsteps scrambled away from the door. I quickly opened it, which probably wasn't smart, but I saw a man running into the woods, and on the face of the door were marks and scrapes, like he was using a tool to pry the door open with. I immediately sobered up and was horrified. The immediate first thought was that, if he came back and got in, no one else was out here to even hear me scream for help or know what was happening. That was a terrifying realization to have in that moment. I was not going to wait around. I ran and got everything important that I'd brought, shoving it into my backpack, and ran out to my car. It was eerily silent outside as I got in. I turned it on and started to pull away. And basically, as soon as I entered into the denser part of the woods, with trees lining the trail out, suddenly a man ran in front of my car, forcing me to slam on my brakes and stop. His eyes glowed in the headlights, wide open and bloodshot, and he had this horribly unkempt, disheveled appearance, and in his hand, he had a crowbar. He started to run around to my driver's side window, and the moment he wasn't in front, I floored it. I heard a thump as I passed him. which I found out later was him hitting the side of my car. I got out of the woods and drove straight home. Spent the next several days trying to find a number or other way to contact the owners of the cabin rental, but had no luck. Everything about that place was strange, and I have no doubt that I wouldn't be here right now if I didn't leave when I did.